The afternoon sun bathed Atlanta, Georgia in a warm, mellow hue. Caroline Levitt, 27, the youngest press secretary in the nation's history, reclined in her opulent apartment nestled just blocks from the state capitol. The petite silver cross pinned to the lapel of her navy blazer, a cherished token from her New Hampshire roots, caught the sunlight as she rose to her feet. Suddenly, her phone buzzed to life. President Trump was calling. "Caroline, there's a faith-based lawsuit unfolding at the Fulton County Courthouse. A Christian group suing after being barred from praying in public. Get over there. Watch. Report." His tone was sharp, commanding, affording no time for deliberation. Her spotless apartment reflected her methodical lifestyle, papers meticulously arranged, outfits selected days in advance. Today's look was understated: blazer, crisp white blouse, tailored black slacks, but the cross remained, more instinct than accessory. As the president's voice in the public sphere, she was no stranger to high-stakes crises. But this one struck closer to her heart. It touched her convictions. Caroline slid into her polished black SUV and maneuvered through the late afternoon traffic that choked Peachtree Street. NPR buzzed with headlines, but she quickly silenced the noise, her mind narrowing to the mission at hand. Before diving in, let us know where you're watching from, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss any breaking stories. Caroline pushed through the glass doors of the Fulton County Courthouse, stepping into a space thick with heat and tension. Voices buzzed in dissonance, a blend of locals awaiting minor hearings, bickering over traffic tickets and rental disputes, punctuated by the rapid tapping of keys at the clerk's station. She checked her watch. 2:53 p.m., just minutes remained before the case she was sent to monitor commenced. Choosing a seat mid-row, she dropped her document bag beside her and opened her phone, fingers ready to capture every detail. Her cross shimmered faintly beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, though she remained unaware of the curious eyes drawn to it. The room was compact, but the disarray made it feel suffocating. To her left sat a man in a faded t-shirt blaring the phrase "I am king," aimlessly scrolling on his phone. On her right, a young woman with a necklace so oversized it rivaled a chandelier murmured to her attorney. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Clearly, courtroom decorum wasn't strictly enforced here. Still, she turned her attention to the task, observing and chronicling the proceedings of the Christian plaintiffs accusing local officials of suppressing public prayer in a city park. Trump intended to spotlight this case, framing it as a battle emblematic of conservative values. Caroline was here to bear witness. The wooden door behind the judge's seat creaked open, and Judge David Davis emerged. At 62, his presence was rigid, his salt and pepper hair slicked back meticulously, wire-rimmed spectacles perched low on a stern nose, and a black robe so crisply pressed it could have come straight from the cleaners. The room hushed as he took his seat, scanning the crowd with eyes as cool and precise as a surgeon's. "All rise," came the commanding voice of David Miller, a tall, broad-shouldered black bailiff whose impassive gaze swept the room. Caroline stood with the rest, her phone still in hand, her eyes fixed on Hargrove. With a thud of the gavel, he opened the session. "This is a court of law, not a stage for self-expression," he announced, his voice steady but cutting. Hargrove wasted no time. A man fined for illegal parking, $50, swiftly resolved. A woman behind on her rent, granted a formal caution. Caroline took note. Hargrove ran his court like a clock, precise, indifferent, mechanical. She observed the man in the "I am king" shirt approach the bench over a neighborhood fence dispute. The judge said nothing about his bold attire. The woman with the grandiose jewelry called forward for a contract issue, no remarks on her glittering statement piece. Caroline's brows furrowed. Something felt inconsistent. Then Hargrove's gaze met hers. He paused, mid-ruling, rifling through documents with a delay that suggested more than just disorganization. Behind those wire-rimmed lenses, his eyes narrowed, recognition flickered. "Miss Levitt," he said, his tone glacial with a trace of unease, the weight of familiarity unmistakable. He knew her from the White House podium. Caroline met his stare evenly, unshaken, rising with practiced poise. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. A few began to connect the dots. "That cross," Hargrove said, gesturing toward her neckline, his voice rigid, "has no place here. This is a neutral chamber, not a platform for religion." She glanced around. No policy against religious symbols was posted. "I'm Caroline Levit, press secretary to the president, here on assignment. This cross is a personal item protected under the First Amendment." "It breaches no rule," she replied with quiet clarity. Hargrove's jaw tightened, color creeping into his cheeks. "Work or not, you don't get to flaunt that here and stir controversy. This is a courtroom, not a sanctuary." He struck the gavel once more, asserting dominion. David Miller remained stationed at the bench, his eyes narrowing slightly in interest. The court clerk, Mrs. Jackson, a no-nonsense woman with her gray hair knotted into a severe bun, paused her typing to peer curiously at Caroline. The man in the slogan T-shirt and the woman with the extravagant necklace exchanged whispers, clearly astonished that neither of them had drawn rebuke. Caroline didn't move. Her grip on the phone tightened. It was now unmistakable. Hargrove wasn't objecting to her presence. He was taking aim at the symbol around her neck. "Sir, I have every right to wear this," she said, voice calm, resolved. "The Constitution ensures it." "Spare me the civics lesson," he cut in sharply. "Step up to the bench." "Now." The air froze. Caroline drew a breath, collected but firm, her heels echoing across the aged wooden floor as she approached the front of the courtroom. A hush blanketed the room. All eyes were on her. The silver cross pinned to the collar of Caroline's navy blazer caught the courthouse lights, flickering like a quiet ember defying an oncoming storm. Judge David Davis, seated high upon the bench, peered over his wire-rimmed spectacles. His eyes narrowed further, his face tinged crimson with restrained fury. "So, Miss Levit," he began, his voice low and serrated, "what exactly are you doing here wearing that?" "I'm here on official duty, sir, and my right to wear this is protected," she replied calmly, fingers tightening around her phone as she discreetly activated the voice recorder. Hargrove slammed his gavel onto the bench, the sound ricocheting through the chamber like a gunshot. "I've dealt with plenty of folks like you, thinking a little faith gives them the freedom to challenge order. This is my courtroom, and I say it's not permitted." He leaned forward, gavel still clenched in his knuckles. "Do you understand that what you're doing could be considered contempt of court?" Caroline's brows knit as she surveyed the room. The man in the "I Am King" T-shirt remained untouched. The woman with the chandelier-sized necklace continued whispering to her attorney, unchallenged. But her modest cross? That was the threat. "Sir, I'm not here to cause a disruption," she replied evenly. "I'm simply doing my job. My appearance harms no one. If there's a formal prohibition, I'd like to review it." Hargrove's lips curled into a cold, mirthless grin. "A formal rule? I am the rule here," he snapped. "You enter this courtroom flaunting that symbol and now demand documentation?" Another thunderous strike of the gavel silenced the room. Mrs. Jackson, the clerk, momentarily froze, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. A ripple of hushed voices spread through the benches. An elderly man in the back leaned to his neighbor and muttered, "Her cross is smaller than that necklace. Why is she the one on trial?" David Miller, the seasoned bailiff, stood nearby with arms crossed and brow furrowed. In his 15 years within these walls, he'd seen this tone before too many times. Caroline inhaled slowly. She knew defiance would only escalate the moment. So, she chose precision over provocation. "Respectfully, sir, if I've broken a rule, I'm entitled to a clear and lawful explanation," she said, angling her phone just slightly to ensure the recording was uninterrupted. Hargrove sneered. "An explanation? You want one?" He leaned back, gavel raised again. "Very well. I'm fining you $500 for contempt. The gavel came down with a finality that rang like Judgment Day. Gasps echoed through the room. Mrs. Jackson's hands hovered, frozen mid-keystroke. Her eyes, filled with unease, met Caroline's. $500? A young woman whispered from the third row. For a cross. The man in the I Am King shirt chuckled softly, but Hargrove's glare cut it short. You'll pay the fine today, the judge continued, his voice like granite. Perhaps then you'll learn what it means to respect order. This isn't a sanctuary, Miss Levit. And it sure as hell isn't your pulpit. He leaned back, smug and self-satisfied, as if he'd delivered a lesson carved in stone. Caroline didn't move. Her expression stayed neutral, but her eyes, sharpened by resolve, never left his. Understood, Your Honor, she said steadily. But if I may ask, why are others here wearing expressive symbols without issue? Printed shirts? Flashy jewelry? Why are they not fined? Hargrove's face burned deeper crimson. His grip on the gavel tightened until his knuckles blanched. Don't twist the issue, he barked. You're the only one bold enough to bring religion into this space. That's the difference. Caroline gave a small nod, as if confirmation had finally crystallized. She said nothing more, but in her mind, the truth was already inscribed. Hargrove wasn't simply upholding rules. He was targeting belief itself. Mrs. Jackson resumed typing, though her fingers trembled on the keys. In 12 years at Hargrove's side, she'd rarely seen such a disproportionate penalty for such a minor thing. David Miller remained by the bench, his eyes flicking between the judge and Caroline. His stance, stoic, yet laced with quiet disapproval, suggested he, too, sensed this was something different. The whispers among the spectators swelled, some cautiously lifting their phones despite the posted ban on recording. Caroline stood at the defendant's stand, phone still in hand, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just about a fine. It was a flashpoint, an opening to reveal something larger. Are you finished, sir? She asked softly, but her tone had an edge that sliced the silence. Hargrove flinched, caught off guard by her restraint. Not quite, he said sharply. You'll pay the fine. Then you'll take your seat. I have more pressing matters than your stunt. The gavel cracked against the bench once again, commanding closure. But Caroline didn't sit. Instead, she stepped forward, palm resting lightly on the wooden edge of the bench, her gaze fixed on the man who had just tried to shame her into silence. I'll pay, she said quietly, but this conversation isn't over. For a fleeting second, Hargrove's expression faltered. She remained standing, unmoved, unbroken, as though carved from the same oak as the courtroom itself. The cross on her collar shimmered once more, not merely an accessory, but a silent vow. Judge Hargrove stared at her, red-faced and simmering. Caroline Levit held her ground at the defendant's stand. The crowd inside the Fulton County Courthouse sat still, breathless. Mrs. Jackson watched with eyes that darted anxiously. David Miller crossed his arms again, his stance protective, waiting. Then, at last, Hargrove broke the silence. Did you hear me, Miss Levit? $500. Due before you leave. Sit down. We're moving on. The gavel rang again. But Caroline remained where she stood. She drew a calm breath, placed her hand once more on the bench's edge, and replied, her voice clear, composed, and unsparing as steel. Sir, before I return to my seat, I need to clarify a few matters for the record. Judge Hargrove narrowed his eyes, momentarily unsettled by the unwavering calm in Caroline's voice. The record? You're not entitled to demand anything in this room, he snapped, though his voice trembled ever so slightly, as if anticipating a shift in the tide. Caroline offered a composed smile, not of arrogance, but the poise of someone who knew precisely where she stood. From her leather satchel, she retrieved a slim, gleaming card edged in gold and raised it for the gallery to see. I am Caroline Levit, Press Secretary to the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. But what you might not realize, Your Honor, is that I don't just speak for the administration. I've studied the law far more intimately than you might assume." The room exhaled in one collective gasp. The man in the I Am King shirt stared, slack-jawed. The woman adorned with the ornate necklace leaned into her attorney, whispering urgently. Judge Hargrove sat frozen, his gavel held aloft, unmoving. "That doesn't change the fact that you violated my rules," he muttered, though the firmness had drained from his voice. But Caroline pressed forward, her voice rising with quiet authority. "Your rules or your personal prejudice? I was sent here by the president to observe a case involving a group of Christians suing the city for banning public prayer. And this," she gestured to the silver cross at her collar, "is an expression of my personal faith, protected by the Constitution. You find me for it." Her tone sharpened. "But do you even understand what the law says?" Hargrove opened his mouth, but the words came too slowly. "I don't need a lecture from you," he muttered, the edge gone from his voice. "This is my courtroom. I decide." "You're mistaken, sir," Caroline interjected, her voice firm as iron. "The law does not belong to you alone. Perhaps you've forgotten Church of the Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah, 1993. The Supreme Court ruled that targeting religious expression without valid cause is unconstitutional." She paused, letting her words settle. "Do you have a valid reason, or is it just that my cross offends you?" A heavy silence blanketed the room. Phones emerged quietly despite the visible signs forbidding recording. Spectators held their breath. Mrs. Jackson, the clerk, stilled her hands above the keyboard, waiting. David Miller, the bailiff, gave the faintest nod, a spark of recognition in his eyes. This wasn't just an outburst. It was a calculated, legal takedown. Caroline continued, her tone now deliberate, measured, almost surgical. "You fine me $500 for contempt. But here's the evidence, right here in this courtroom." She pointed toward the man in the slogan shirt. "He's in clear violation of professional decorum. No objection." Then, to the woman in oversized jewelry, "She wears an extravagant accessory, equally disruptive." Not a word. "But my cross, modest and meaningful, that is what drew your wrath." "That's not enforcement of law, that's personal animus." Judge Hargrove's face shifted, anger fading to pallor, authority slipping through his fingers. "You're slandering me," he stammered, his voice growing hollow, uncertain. "I'm documenting," Caroline replied, lifting her phone. "I've recorded everything from the moment you singled me out until now. I've already sent a transcript to the White House office. This won't end with your fine." The crowd stirred again. Someone shouted, "She's absolutely right." A smattering of applause followed, quickly hushed by Wilson. Hargrove leaned forward, voice cracking. "Miss Levit, I can withdraw the fine. There's no need to escalate." He tapped the gavel again, its usual command now sounding thin. Caroline held his gaze. "No, sir. Withdrawing the fine because of who I am only deepens the injustice. The question isn't about me. It's about how you wield power in this courtroom." Her next words struck like iron through glass. "I'm requesting a full audit of your rulings over the past 6 months, specifically any fines or sanctions related to religious expression. And I strongly recommend mandatory First Amendment training for all court staff, including yourself." The gallery exploded. The elderly man in the back row jumped to his feet, clapping loudly. "Preach." A young woman whispered in awe, "Who is she?" Mrs. Jackson typed furiously, her eyes wide, capturing the moment with the gravity of someone archiving history. David Miller allowed a small smile to curve at the edge of his mouth. He had sensed it all along. Caroline was different. Hargrove sat hunched in his chair, gavel limp in hand, color draining from his cheeks. He now looked not like a judge, but like a man who had misjudged a storm. Caroline stepped forward, her tone low but resonant. "You assumed I was just a mouthpiece," she said. "But I've stood beside President Trump through lawsuits that shaped this nation, from election disputes to constitutional fights. I studied law so I could defend him, and now I'm using it to defend myself and others like me." She gently placed her White House credential on the bench before stepping back, never once averting her gaze. Hargrove tried to respond, but no words came. He saw her now not as a press secretary or a defendant, but as a force of clarity and consequence. Scattered applause broke out again, a ripple of vindication. Mrs. Jackson typed faster than ever, eyes gleaming. David Miller stepped closer to the bench, standing now not just as an officer of the court, but as an observer to justice. Judge Hargrove slumped deeper, authority slipping from his posture. Caroline remained unmoved, her silver cross catching the light, not just a symbol of belief, but now, unmistakably, a banner of triumph. She turned and exited the Fulton County Courthouse, the late afternoon sun igniting the cross on her collar like a flare. The time read 3:30 p.m., but inside, a revolution had just occurred. At the glass doors, she paused to check her phone. The recording had been sent, along with a message to the president's senior advisor. "Judge, find me over the cross. Situation addressed. Awaiting directive." This was no longer personal. It had become political and powerful. Back inside, murmurs still echoed off the courtroom walls. The elderly man whispered to his neighbor, voice trembling, "I've never seen anyone floor a judge that fast." A young woman leaned toward her boyfriend and whispered, "She's the White House press secretary. Absolutely remarkable." Mrs. Jackson, still shaken, moved swiftly across the clerk's office, printing the official transcript of the session with trembling hands. She'd never typed faster, yet never felt more certain that history had just passed through her courtroom. David Miller, the veteran bailiff, stepped out into the hallway, his phone already pressed to his ear. He was calling a colleague. "You won't believe this, some young woman just shut down Hargrove." Silenced him. Word spread faster than wildfire in a summer wind. Caroline hadn't even reached her car before her phone lit up like a switchboard. A buzz from X, the former Twitter, alerted her. The hashtag #CrossInCourt was trending. She opened the app and saw the first viral post. Judge slaps WH press secretary with a $500 fine for wearing a cross. She fires back with the Constitution. Leaves him speechless. #CrossInCourt. In moments, the replies flooded in. Who is this woman? Unreal. That judge's days are numbered. Finally, someone's fighting for our rights. A high-profile conservative account posted, "The system is cracking down on faith." But Caroline Levit just pushed back hard. Proud moment. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. The momentum had begun. By 4 p.m., President Trump weighed in from his personal account. "Caroline Levit, my incredible press secretary, just taught a liberal judge a lesson in religious liberty. Legal brilliance. We will never allow faith to be silenced." The post garnered 50,000 shares in under half an hour. Right-wing media seized the moment. Fox News blasted the headline across screens. "White House press secretary challenges anti-faith judge and wins." Just as the online storm surged, Caroline's phone rang. The senior advisor to the president was on the line. "You were outstanding," he said, voice alive with triumph. "The president wants this pushed hard. Draft a statement tonight." Back in the courthouse, Judge David Davis sat alone in his private chambers. A dull lamp cast long shadows across his cluttered desk. His untouched coffee had gone cold. His phone vibrated endlessly, calls from the Judicial Council, reporters, old colleagues. He didn't answer. Instead, he sat silently, face pale, hands wrapped around the mug as if it could anchor him. "She's just a kid," he muttered. How did this spiral so fast? But deep down, he knew. He hadn't just crossed a sharp mind. He'd collided with a movement, and he'd underestimated it. Elsewhere in the courthouse, Mrs. Jackson could no longer stay silent. She dialed a contact at a local paper, her voice firm despite the quake in her chest. "I've worked for Hargrove 12 years, she said. And she was right. He's targeted religious symbols for years, especially Christian ones. I have notes to prove it." She opened a desk drawer and retrieved a weathered notebook. Inside, years of entries. Crosses fined. Hijabs questioned. Prayer badges flagged. But loud, irreverent shirts? Blatant jewelry? No action. She knew going public was a risk, but after today, silence was betrayal. David Miller was having a similar reckoning. He gathered a few courthouse colleagues in the break room. I've seen Hargrove fine at least 20 people this year alone, for crosses, badges, headscarves, he said, voice tight. And yet, if you wear something vulgar or flashy, he just grins. One colleague nodded gravely. We need to call the press. This has to break by 5 o'clock. Outside, a Channel 7 news reporter stood live on the courthouse steps. Breaking news, White House Press Secretary Caroline Levitt fined $500 today for wearing a small cross in court. She challenged the judge, quoted constitutional law, and walked out unshaken. Hashtag Cross in Court has already passed 100,000 mentions on X. More testimonies surfaced online. Hargrove fined me $200 for a prayer pin last year. He told my wife to remove her cross during a custody hearing. Then came the video. Someone had recorded inside the courtroom Caroline holding her White House credentials, speaking with calm conviction. It exploded online, over 1 million views in hours. In her car, parked just off a quiet street near the courthouse, Caroline watched the surge. She dialed her husband, her voice steady, laced with restrained exhilaration. I just shut down a judge, she said. He laughed, easygoing as always. Only you could turn a courthouse into a campaign. Stay safe, he added gently. She hung up, her eyes shifting to a new email from Trump's office. Prep for tonight's press conference. We're taking this national. Elsewhere, Judge Hargrove, now home, turned on the television. The screen blared. Atlanta judge faces public outcry after press secretary confrontation. He switched it off. His hands trembled. The Judicial Council had left 3 messages. He knew what morning would bring. 3 decades of rulings now under the microscope. All because of a 27-year-old woman and a silver cross. By 8 a.m. the following day, the Georgia Judicial Oversight Office buzzed with activity. Inside a glass-walled conference room, Elizabeth Bailey, a tenured legal investigator, addressed her team. She laid out dozens of files across a long oak table. Everything tied to Hargrove and religious symbols. That's our focus. The White House filed an official complaint just after midnight. We have 48 hours to respond. Her team nodded, already rifling through data, case notes, transcripts, internal memos. Meanwhile, in Washington, Caroline sat in her West Wing office, her cross still pinned in place, untouched. She reviewed the courtroom footage once more, then forwarded fresh analytics to the president's advisor. Over 200 first-hand accounts from X accusing Hargrove of faith-based bias. We can build on this. Let's press forward. Her phone buzzed endlessly, supporters, lawyers, activists. One message stood out, from a second-year law student. You've inspired me. Hargrove fined my mom over a cross. She cried for days. Caroline read it twice, then closed her eyes for a moment. This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. Back in Atlanta, Mrs. Jackson stepped into the investigator's suite, her hands clutching the same notebook. I've tracked 12 years with Hargrove, she said, her voice trembling yet resolute. He always went after visible faith, crosses, hijabs, prayer beads. But loud shirts? Flashy jewelry? He didn't care. She placed the notebook on the table. Elizabeth Bailey flipped through the entries with care. Her expression hardened. This, she said, is exactly what we needed. Elizabeth Bailey flipped carefully through the worn notebook, her eyes narrowing as she read line after line of troubling entries. September 14, 2024, man fined $300 for wearing a cross, labeled a disruption. October 20, 2024, Muslim woman fined $200 for hijab, deemed inappropriate. Her jaw tightened. This is invaluable. Thank you. Just then, David Miller arrived, a folded paper in hand. "I've served as a bailiff in that courtroom for 15 years, he said, offering a handwritten affidavit. Hargrove fined people displaying religious symbols at least 3 times more often than any other dress code issue. One day, I watched him hit 5 folks with fines over crosses, yet ignored 3 in profane t-shirts." Elizabeth nodded, jotting notes while her team matched testimony with official dockets. The pattern crystallized quickly. Data revealed that over the past year alone, 70% of all fines tied to religious symbols targeted Christians, with average penalties of $150 to $200, twice the amount issued for comparable dress code violations. Meanwhile, in his dimly lit home office, David Davis faced the Georgia Judicial Council via a live video call. His voice was barely audible. "I didn't intend to be biased," he muttered, head bowed into his palms. Elizabeth presented the findings without hesitation. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, voice level, "our records show that individuals wearing crosses received harsher penalties than others, an 80% disparity. How do you account for that?" The judge was silent. Memories of Caroline flashed through his mind, her unflinching gaze, her command of constitutional law. I didn't realize," he murmured. "I thought I was maintaining decorum." By midday, Elizabeth finalized the preliminary report. "This isn't just about Hargrove," she told the council. "We've identified 3 additional judges with milder, but similar tendencies. Still, Hargrove is the clearest case: systemic bias against religious expression, most notably Christianity." The council voted unanimously. Hargrove was suspended immediately, pending a final decision. Word spread swiftly. X exploded with new hashtags. #CrossInCourt. Hargrove suspended. Levit breaks the system. A prominent conservative commentator posted, "Trump's legal prodigy strikes again. The First Amendment just got its fiercest defender." At 6 p.m., Caroline stood before the mirror in the White House briefing room, adjusting her blazer. The silver cross still gleamed at her collar, now no longer a target, but a badge of principle. Trump stepped in behind her, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "You made me proud today, Caroline," he said. "Tonight, we remind them, faith in America is not negotiable." She gave a confident nod, then strode to the podium. Cameras flashed, the air electric. "Yesterday," she began, "I was fined for wearing a cross not because I violated any rule, but because a judge believed he stood above the Constitution. I challenged that. Not just for myself, but for every American who's been silenced for what they believe." The press roared with questions, but Caroline answered each one with clarity, citing legal precedent, quoting real-time data from X, and driving home a powerful message: freedom of faith must never be discretionary. Back in Atlanta, Hargrove sat alone in his darkened living room. He watched the briefing unfold on television, his face now a symbol of the very system he had once presided over. His inbox overflowed with messages, disavowals from former colleagues, inquiries from journalists, apologies that felt like salt on a wound. But what stunned him most were the statements from Mrs. Jackson and David Miller, the people he'd trusted, who had now stepped forward to speak the truth. He opened his laptop and searched for the case Caroline had cited, Church of the Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah. As he read the ruling, his breath caught. "She was right," he whispered. "I was wrong." For the first time in his 3-decade career, he felt the weight of humility. He picked up the phone and dialed the council. "I'm resigning," he said, voice raw. "But I want to help fix this." The next morning, Hargrove appeared at a small judicial council hearing, no robe, no pretense. "I couldn't see my own bias," he admitted. "But Caroline Levit opened my eyes. I'd like to join the training initiative to ensure this never happens again." Elizabeth Bailey nodded. His transformation wouldn't erase the harm, but it might plant seeds for change. The story swept through national media, sparking fierce debate. On X, some jeered. "Hargrove's just trying to save face." Others saw a man trying to make amends. He admitted fault. That's more than most. Back in Washington, Caroline returned to her office. An email from Elizabeth appeared. Hargrove has resigned. He'll help with training. You changed him. Caroline looked at her reflection. The silver cross still shone at her collar. What began as a routine assignment had evolved into something far greater. She had lit a fire not just in one courtroom, but in the heart of the system itself. Just 4 days after the confrontation, Washington had shifted. From her White House window, Caroline stared down at Pennsylvania Avenue, her phone vibrating with messages from supporters, lawmakers, even strangers. One subject line read simply, "Thank you." Then came the official email from the Judicial Council. New regulations passed. "Thank you, Miss Levit." She smiled, knowing the victory was not hers alone, but shared by every voice that dared to speak. The council's reforms were swift. Religious symbols can no longer be banned unless proven to disrupt proceedings. All judicial staff, judges, clerks, bailiffs must complete First Amendment training. At a council meeting, Elizabeth stood before a panel and said, "Judge Hargrove's case has made one thing clear: transparency and training are non-negotiable." Outside the Fulton County Courthouse, a new plaque was installed. Religious freedom, a right beyond violation. On X, #CrossInCourt remained among the top trends. Caroline scrolled through a video of the unveiling. In the audience stood David Davis, no longer a judge, but a man seeking to repair what he had helped break. He addressed the crowd, voice raspy but sincere. "I believed I was fair. But I wasn't. Caroline Levit taught me to look inward. I urge you, don't let your eyes close to your own bias." Silence followed. Then, nods. Mrs. Jackson, now promoted to lead the court's transparency program, sat in the front row, capturing every word. David Miller, newly appointed head of bailiff training, added, "We are the gatekeepers of justice. If we witness bias, we must speak." Caroline Levit did. "And so will we." Hargrove nodded, humbled. In her office, Caroline placed the printed receipt for her $500 fine into a sleek glass frame on the wall. It wasn't a trophy. It was a testament. A reminder that one voice, armed with conviction and knowledge, could alter the course of a system. A silver cross, a single stand, and a spark that became a signal fire. President Trump entered, beaming, his signature stride as bold as ever. He clapped Caroline on the shoulder with unmistakable pride. "You're a star, Caroline. The religious liberty crowd loves you, and so do I," he said with a booming laugh. "We just scored a major victory. Keep this momentum alive." She nodded with resolve, preparing for her next speech, this time in Virginia, where thousands were already gathering to hear from the woman now hailed as the White House's legal prodigy. The impact of the courtroom confrontation had stretched far beyond Atlanta or even D.C. It was now a national conversation. States like Texas, Florida, and Ohio began reevaluating their judicial policies. The governor of Texas posted on X, "Thanks to Caroline Levit for reminding America what religious freedom truly means. Texas stands with her." In Florida, a coalition of attorneys formally petitioned the state bar for mandatory First Amendment training, citing #CrossInCourt. On X, a movement had emerged, ordinary people sharing photos of crosses, hijabs, prayer beads, or Buddhist bracelets with captions like, "My faith, my right, not up for debate." Caroline scrolled through the posts from her hotel room, a swell of pride in her chest. She had never expected one afternoon's confrontation to ignite a national fire. The next morning, Caroline stood on a stage in Richmond, Virginia, facing a roaring crowd of over 5,000. Signs reading religious freedom is non-negotiable fluttered like banners in a crusade. She stepped up to the microphone. "That day in court, I only intended to do my job," she said, her voice amplified across the grounds. "But when a judge fined me for my faith, I knew silence wasn't an option. I didn't stand up alone. I stood up with all of you. The crowd thundered. Some shouted, Caroline for president. She smiled humbly, waving as camera flashes painted her in brilliant light. A photo of her, hand raised, cross gleaming, quickly went viral. Journalists dubbed it the symbol of resilience. Back in D.C., Mrs. Jackson led a new oversight initiative, every courtroom fine now meticulously recorded, reviewed monthly for bias. David Miller trained new bailiffs, his voice unwavering. Never be afraid to speak when something's wrong. Caroline did. And so must you. One quiet evening, Caroline received a letter from Elizabeth Bailey. You didn't just change a judge, Caroline. You changed a system. Thank you. She laid the letter beside the framed copy of her $500 fine and reflected on just how far she had come. That fine had once been an insult. Now it was a spark. At 9 p.m., Trump called again. Caroline, you're my gold, he said. The opposition's shaken, and we're gaining ground. Rest tonight, we've got more ahead. She laughed gently. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm ready. She hung up, then looked at the cross between her fingers. It had begun as a simple emblem of personal faith. Now it lit the road she traveled, not just for herself, but for countless others. 3 months later, Caroline Levitt stood once again behind the White House podium. Before her stood reporters, influencers, and leaders from faith communities across America. The cameras flashed, and the familiar glint of silver at her collar sparked like a beacon. 3 months ago, she began, I was fined for wearing a cross, not because it disrupted court, but because a judge decided he was above the law. I stood up, not just for myself, but for all of you. And together, we changed the system. Applause erupted. Some in the crowd held signs. #CrossInCourt. Faith is not a violation. Outside the Atlanta courthouse, a new plaque had been installed. Justice honors all faiths. In her office that evening, Caroline read a letter from a young law student. Dear Miss Levitt, I was too afraid to speak up before, but your courage gave me strength. I'm launching a free legal clinic for those discriminated against for their faith. Thank you. She smiled, mist touching her eyes. Her actions had reached beyond policy, into the hearts of the next generation. Meanwhile, David Davis, now retired, stood before a room of young judicial trainees. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke. I failed once. I thought I was impartial. But Caroline Levitt opened my eyes. Justice cannot live where bias hides. Mrs. Jackson, now the director of transparency, took notes from the front row. David Miller, promoted to lead bailiff training, added from the podium. We're the first line of defense. If something feels wrong, we speak. Caroline did. And so must we. Hargrove listened, quietly grateful. He had once resisted the truth, now he helped carry it. In her office, Caroline framed another piece beside the fine, the official Judicial Council report confirming sweeping court reforms. She stood on the White House balcony, watching as the sun dipped behind the Capitol. The silver cross in her hand shimmered in the dying light, not merely a symbol of belief, but now a banner of triumph, born from challenge. She whispered softly into the evening. Freedom doesn't come free. It takes fighters. A message pinged onto her phone. It was from the Judicial Council. We'd like you to lead the new National Commission on Court Reform. Caroline smiled, eyes steady. She was ready. From one confrontation in a modest courthouse, she had reshaped national law, stirred a movement, and lit a path for others to follow. She had proven a truth as old as the Constitution itself. One person, one belief, can shake the world.